2023, 2022, and the years that gone by. Same day, same week, same month. A holiday that reminds the people of what unity looks like and what it can actually do for this new country. The bravery and nationalism of fellow Filipinos is never to be considered a joke. To make things light, it actually gave creation to memes in social media under the category Never Forgetting. But comedy aside, never forget from what? What should be engraved in our memories as a Filipino? The masquerade played by what many people consider a god? This is Guillotine of Headless Rats, a martial law discussion. Before anything else, let's go back in history as to why martial law happened in the first place. What made the declaration justified? On a justice scale, according to former President Marcos, he had to declare the martial law in order to end the communist threat. These threats occurred 1 month after he was elected as the president. During his 5th State of the Nation address, this triggered the first quarter storm, which is a set of rallies. One of the biggest rallies was called the Battle of Menjola. After that, there were bombings on several locations over a period of time. On the other side, these rallies and protests were born from various people asking for good governance, believing he won due to a rigged election. They targeted Marcos's relation with partners, or what they call cronies, which people believed were Marcos's way in order to cheat the economy of the country as service to landlords. The event that tipped the scale was the ambush of former Defense Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile, which, believe it or not, was fake. And their phone call dialogue can be pretty much summarized with this. But according to Juan Ponce Enrile himself, on a press conference during 1986 with Fidel Ramos, he admitted to the planned ambush, but is now under fire for hypocrisy for disclosing the truth as he changed his answer in his memoir. However, a witness by the name of Oscar Lopez and even Marcos' own diary stated that the ambushing happened in order to justify the declaration of martial law that was already set and planned. Moreover, one important figure in this piece of history is Benigno Aquino Jr., who received military info stating that the previously stated bombings were also planned as a wager to justify the execution of martial law. The first quarter storm was where Filipinos started a series of gatherings in secrecy that had intentions more patriotic than before. Think of it as a growing plant, where first a seed is planted in the soils of the Philippines. This seed was planted by none other than our own heroes, namely Jose Rizal, Lapu-Lapu, and Lapindula, who were ancestors who experienced the same situation of loss of freedom and unfair superiority. Moreover, the seeds grew inside students, journalists, and everyday people who were looking forward to the end of the regime, torture, and brutality brought by the martial law. During this part of the martial law, everyone from young to old, men to women, is invited to join. as simple participation contributes to a large amount of nationalism for the country. Notably, one of the methods was writing on placards with red markers. There are phrases and sentences that criticize the inhumane process of conducting martial law, the government's poor action, the declining economy of the country, and the relation to foreign investors. Specifically, these were equivalent to the phrase makibaka, which means to dare. There are other methods of people fighting back, despite the terror brought by the guns and firearms. Some other ways to show their love for their country are lawyers arguing against the crumbling legal system, filing petitions and defending detainees, exposing the violation on human rights. Artists created poems, songs, and artworks despite the government having huge control over the media.
My countrymen, as of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
One question was established. Why? Why was martial law placed in act? But we have to consider another. What did it do to affect the people? What happened that changed the lives of fellow Filipinos just for them to be criticized as overly dramatic or even liars? On the first day of martial law, several companies were shut down, notably electricity, telecommunication, water, and several transportations, specifically Meralco, PLDT, Nawasa, and Philippine Airlines, as well as 400 media outlets consisting of radio stations, newspaper publications, and televisions. However, there were several like Canlaon Broadcasting System, Bailey Express, and Channel 9, which were owned by said cronies of Marcos, allowed them to continue and control what could be said to the people through various media. Moreover, during this first day, 4 senators were arrested by Marcos, namely Ninoy Aquino, Pepe Jocno, Ramon Mitra Jr., and Soc Rodrigo, who were known critics of Marcos. Additionally, an estimate of 8,000 civilians were arrested in just a single day. This included journalists, students, and even workers. During 1972 to 1977 was the conducting of curfew hours from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. Some gave it a positive review, as during these hours, everything was silent, meaning everything was in order. Despite that, behind their knowledge, everything around them is starting to get stripped off. Media, the court, and even judicial systems. Aside from curfew hours, there are other things Filipinos had to consider back then, such as dress codes where men should not have long hair and women are not allowed to wear skirts above their knee. Playing with toy guns and video games are prohibited as they were sources of violence. Even the anime Voltes 5 had to stop airing episodes before the finale as the action was also considered violent. Speaking of violence, during this period, infamous techniques were inflicted upon the citizens, as to promote this peace and order. A number of 70,000 were arrested without arrest warrants, 34,000 were tortured, 3,240 were killed, and 352 disappeared. These all happened under the eyes of the government. These disappearances were linked to safe houses, but quite the irony, as they were the furthest thing from being safe, considering this is a hidden place where the military will conduct torture to civilians whether they were innocent or guilty. Some methods include sleep deprivation, interrogation, water cure or forced sensation of drowning, and the infamous electric chair and electrocution through the people's private parts. More to this, according to case reports found in Hawaii, it proved that even Marcos himself knew that there was this ongoing torture. On September 21, 1972, this was considered a period of new society, coined by President Marcos. This new society was created by a series of promises and plans he envisioned during the martial law. These promises include ending poverty and creating equality, ending world hunger and drive development, end corruption and enact justice, end deception and promote truth, and end violence and usher in peace. We can really ask ourselves, how many of these were dreams that turned reality during his period till the present today? On the bright side, period of new society was also coined due to the achievements he brought to the country, placing it to a better status in various fields, such as healthcare, culture, and transportation. Some of his notable feats were the construction of the longest bridge of the Philippines, the San Juanico Bridge. Other buildings such as the Cultural Center of the Philippines, Philippine Heart Center, Lung Center of the Philippines, and National Kidney Transplant Institute. Because after all that, the country still has various opinions regarding President Marcos and his decisions, even supporting that the genocide or cleansing should come back, believing that conducting such large-scale event actually brings the Philippines at its peak. Some people believe that during that era, it was actually considered the golden age. Several tales include the 1:1 ratio of peso and dollar, how everyone had a job, and even stories that there are no poor people on the street. Even Imelda herself said that during their time, no beggars can be seen.
When I see Manila, I feel so depressed and sad. This was a little paradise. Before, during my time, there were no beggars. I had a place for them.
But in reality, these tales have already been debunked by several experts. For instance, the peso-dollar exchange rate was already at 3 pesos in 1965. It even further depreciated throughout Marcos' term. Moreover, the earliest official poverty data from the Philippine Statistics Authority is in 1985 and was at 44.2%, which is 4.3% higher than in 1991. Likewise, during in 1972, the unemployment rates were at 6.30%, but at 1985, it rose to 27.65%, setting a record of breaking a rule of a Phillips screw law in economics, stating that unemployment rate should be inversely proportional to the prices of basic commodities. Additionally, the usage of architecture was a brilliant idea to paint progress to the Philippines, attracting attention, allowing it to be called progressive and developed, such as the mentioned cultural centers, without minding the idea that the creation of such buildings required huge sums of money that had to be lent from other sources. Lastly, others argue that martial law was good, as it created a safe space for all Filipinos. To be fair, only a portion of that statement is true. We can't deny that the implementation of rigid rules and strict curfews created a safe environment. But it is not for all Filipinos. An expert stated that it was safe during the earlier months of implementation. However, it spiraled down when people witnessed what was happening to fellow classmates, families, and friends. It can be represented with a graph. The more powerful you are, and the more you are known to support the Marcos administration, the safer you are from the brutality. On the other hand, if you are suspected without further evidence as an opposition to the government, you can be charged without an arrest warrant and even killed.
Of the specification of the charge, guilty. Of the charge, guilty.
New Society, New Republic, New Philippines. On January 2, 1981, the martial law was lifted, but oppression and repression were still ongoing. This was considered the New Republic of the Philippines. In a speech delivered on June 18, 1981, President Ferdinand Marcos shared his vision for a new Philippines. He referred to it as New Philippinism, emphasizing the need for innovation, genuine democracy, and greatness. The New Philippinism aimed to move beyond formalities and create a nation that would advance, protect, and fulfill its national interest. However, the center of attention in this portion is the important figure mentioned at the start of the video, Benigno Aquino Jr., who was the leader of the opposition. Though he was supposed to be sentenced to death on 1977, he was allowed to seek medical aid and self-exile in the US. But as he returned, he was assassinated on August 21, 1983. This sparked another outrage and uproar that echoed throughout the whole Philippines, as Filipinos demanded answers and justice from Marcos, who was suspected to be the person behind the assassination. During this period, people used arts and literature with creativity and anger to convey the message towards their target recipient. Likewise, a poetry protest even occurred because of the similarities of themes a number of poets used, such as courage and grief. Along the weeping tears are eyes of anger, leading to one of the important movements in this piece of history, which is Jaja, or Justice for Aquino, Justice for All movement, where people that supported Ninoy Aquino, who was not the only martyr of the Marcos dictatorship, turned enraged, seeking justice to thousands who were killed and tortured, and millions who were suppressed and stripped of rights. These people boycotted government-controlled newspapers, where on campus, newspapers were set on fire to protest against the lack of press freedom. These times were full of charges and lawsuits. To give a brief summary and to have emphasis as to why he was considered a dictator, President Ferdinand Marcos was placed on power in 1965 and was re-elected again in 1969. As discussed before, the rising number of violent demonstrations and others mentioned justified the imposition of martial law. By the virtue of his emergency powers, he managed to replace constitution for his own ends through doubtful circumstances. He intimidated the Supreme Court and upheld martial law as well as the new constitution, ordering military men to be placed with the purpose of intimidating voters. Officials having a quota to say yes and no's were not recorded. He also issued 11 presidential decrees that suppressed press freedom, where journalists who did not comply were faced with restrictions, physical threats, forced resignation, and libel suits. Most that were allowed to operate were crony newspapers such as Times Journal, Bulletin Today, and Philippine Daily Express, where they conducted bootlicking reportage on the country's economy as said earlier during the period of new society, which is to earn favor to those who are powerful even without dignity, while completely covering the truth about the political issues. This allowed Marcos to obtain one powerful item, which is not literally an object, but it is a cloak of legality, which he had absolute rule. However, there were factors that worked together which led to the downfall of said dictator, stripping the cloak and restoring the country. This is also known as legal opposition. It was composed of members of the upper middle classes that uses non-violent tactics such as advocating political reforms. However, they were not a united movement because a group of different middle and upper classes had different motives. This is why Marcos tolerated them, so long as they were incapable of viably replacing him or attaining the support of the masses. Communist Party of the Philippines' growth was fastest in areas where human rights violations were high due to military presence, while armed forces of the Philippines also experienced rapid growth during this period and they were better equipped. However, there was a difference between the two. Greg Jones writes that despite a high rate of illiteracy, communist soldiers could explain why they were fighting and what they were fighting for. In contrast, most government soldiers were poor peasants or slum dwellers who enlisted in the government not out of political conviction but because of economic deprivation. Even though the Catholic Church, which sympathized with Marcos' anti-communism, had a degree of independence when it came to carrying out their social projects, which focused on lessening poverty and defending the poor against communism. However, the provincial clergy started becoming radicalized after seeing the effects of the Marcos dictatorship on the poor. As early as 1979, the health of President Marcos had been deteriorating. This was kept a secret at first, but it was common knowledge then that Marcos was already sick, especially at the time of the assassination of Ninoy Aquino. Blas Ople, Marcos' Minister of Labor, stated that the health of our leader is undergoing certain vicissitudes or changes where problems started a year ago. In the last years of the Marcos regime, the Philippine economy was almost grinding to a halt. This was so despite the fact that the Marcos administration implemented its three-pronged development strategy: the Green Revolution in agriculture, growth and diversity in agricultural and forestry exports, and massive external borrowing. The profit from these three strategies were amassed disproportionately to the wealthiest in the population, thereby causing a large disparity between the rich and the poor. In the first week of 1985, President Marcos was interviewed in the David Brinkley Show. He stated his intention to call for a snap election, even going so far as to invite members of the US Congress to observe, calling the accusation of fraud as unfounded. This was an attempt to consolidate support and show the United States the legitimacy of the Marcos administration. The announcement for a snap election within 3 months was ahead of schedule, and the next regular elections were supposed to be held in 1987. The president was overconfident. He disregarded the objections of his family, his cabinet, and his party. Even First Lady Imelda Marcos, who was abroad at that time, was also reportedly taken aback by the announcement. However, this confidence only showed his isolation from the people who supported his administration because they started decreasing significantly. Because of these circumstances and a final push, the future of the Philippines set sail in another course.
To the service of the nation. しかし、秋の新政権にとっては、経済の立て直しなど難問が山積している。
Finally, after all those years, the people had enough. From the constant torture to stripping of all rights, to killing one of the important and supported people of the country. This allowed the formation of one of the biggest and historic protests in the Philippines, which occurred across 4 days, from February 21 to 25 of 1986, the famous People Power or Lakas ng Bayan Revolution. The people only had one way, forward, meaning once you're part, there is no turning back. Those companies and utilities owned by Marcos cronies now became oppositions. This revolution showed true cooperation and the influence of the people when they shared a common goal. They encountered problems as turmoil nationwide happened for weeks. But after overcoming it, sheer happiness and joy can be heard from their tears of success, as their faces showed the biggest smiles. They were able to finally show the laughter and screams they wanted to express after 14 years. This subject has many sides. Even while working on this, I had a hard time placing statements and data, as each part of the story has multiple views at stake. But as I continued on this project, researching on this said topic showed me that not everything told by people who think they are right told the truth, as a lot of facts they tell are backed up by opinions and preferences. They're either incomplete or wrong in general. It showed me that even I was wrong with my perception on this, and the research I conducted was important to have a complete understanding. I won't say that the whole conduct of martial law is bad, as even experts say that during this era, there were good things that happened to the country. But we all know that the fear, terror, and falsehood it inflicted upon the history of the country is a fact and something that should be